A tornado siren wails across a flat, silent plain. Nature's fury often follows a predictable script, but sometimes it breaks all the rules. We are about to journey through 33 of America's most bizarre natural disasters. Events so strange they challenge everything we think we know about our planet. You will hear true stories of a city flooded by a wave of molasses and of earthquakes that made a mighty river run backward. How could a calm winter day suddenly unleash a blizzard that buried entire trains? What force creates a firestorm so intense it generates its own weather? By the end, you will know the astonishing truths behind these historical oddities. What is the most unbelievable disaster you have ever heard of? Boston's North End was a normal industrial neighborhood on an unseasonably warm January afternoon. But that normalcy shattered in an instant with a sound witnesses described as a deep, muffled roar. A giant tank, taller than a 4-story building and filled with more than 2.3 million gallons of molasses, had torn itself apart. What surged into the streets was not a slow, oozing flow. It was a wave, a wall of sticky, dark syrup 25 feet high, moving at an astonishing 35 miles per hour. It smashed entire buildings off their foundations, lifted a train car right off the tracks, and engulfed everything in its path. People and horses were caught in the viscous tide, struggling against a substance that was impossibly heavy and thick. The science behind this chaos is as strange as the event itself. In its initial surge, the molasses behaved like a terrifying fluid, a flash flood of incredible density and power. But as it spread and began to cool in the winter air, it transformed. The syrup thickened rapidly, trapping victims in a substance that hardened like cement, making rescue efforts a desperate, grueling nightmare. The disaster claimed 21 lives and injured 150 others. For weeks, the harbor ran brown, and the city itself carried the sickly, sweet smell of molasses. A bizarre and haunting reminder of the day a common food ingredient became a destructive force of nature. This event left a permanent mark not just on the city's infrastructure, but on industrial safety regulations across the country. How could something so mundane become so deadly? The answer lies in a perfect storm of negligence and physics, a lesson written not in water but in syrup. The bizarre disaster sparked an even stranger legal drama. For years, the company that owned the massive tank fought desperately to avoid responsibility, pointing fingers in a surprising direction. They publicly claimed that anarchists had planted a bomb, hoping to blame the catastrophe on the political turmoil of the era. But the truth was far more mundane, and it was uncovered through a then revolutionary process of forensic engineering. A pioneering investigation meticulously examined the tank's steel fragments and its shoddy construction. The evidence was undeniable. The tank had been poorly built and negligently maintained, with walls too thin and inadequate testing. It was a simple, tragic case of structural failure, a silent killer lurking in plain sight. This landmark case became one of the first major class action lawsuits in Massachusetts history, pitting the victims and their families against a powerful corporation. The legal battle dragged on for 6 long years, but the final verdict was clear. The company was found liable, forced to pay damages that would be equivalent to millions of dollars today. The legacy of the Great Molasses Flood is etched into modern life. The public outrage it generated led directly to some of the nation's first comprehensive industrial safety laws and building codes. It established that corporations had a fundamental duty to ensure public safety, a principle we now take for granted. This was not just a flood of syrup. It was a wave of change, a sticky, tragic disaster that reshaped American industry forever. While the Great Molasses Flood was a lesson in industrial failure, another American disaster proved that the land itself could turn against us. The 1930s brought a catastrophe born not from a single tank, but from millions of plowed acres. This was the Dust Bowl, an ecological nightmare that transformed the Great Plains into a barren wasteland. For generations, settlers had been told the soil was a limitless resource. They tore up the deep-rooted native grasses that had held the earth in place for centuries, replacing them with wheat. When a severe, years-long drought struck, that soil had nothing left to hold it down. The result was an apocalypse of dust. The strangest manifestations were the dust storms themselves, known as black blizzards. These were not gentle gusts of wind. They were colossal, rolling walls of black dirt, thousands of feet high, moving with the force of a tidal wave. Witnesses described watching these storms approach, blocking out the sun so completely that midday turned to an eerie, pitch-black midnight. The static electricity they generated was another bizarre and terrifying side effect. The constant, violent friction of countless dust particles created massive electrical charges in the air. People would get painful shocks simply by touching a doorknob. The electricity would short out automobile engines, stranding drivers in the choking darkness. It danced along fence lines with a faint blue glow, a hauntingly beautiful yet dangerous phenomenon in the midst of utter devastation. This man-made disaster forced a mass exodus of hundreds of thousands of people, known as Okkies, who abandoned their buried farms in search of a new life. The Dust Bowl stands as a stark reminder that our greatest challenges can come not from the sky or the sea, but from the very ground beneath our feet, a lesson written in the dust. Families would seal their windows and doors with wet rags, yet still the fine, powdery silt found its way inside, coating every surface, every plate of food with a gritty layer of despair. Houses were buried up to their eaves in dunes of dirt, and people had to dig tunnels just to get outside. Children, their lungs filled with the relentless dust, developed a condition known as dust pneumonia, a constant, hacking cough that became the soundtrack of a generation. This was a life of perpetual, suffocating twilight. Yet, from this profound hardship, a powerful cultural response was born. The catastrophe gave voice to artists who would define an era. Woody Guthrie, a son of Oklahoma, picked up his guitar and began writing songs that chronicled the exodus and the struggle, his lyrics becoming anthems for the displaced and the downtrodden. His music was raw, honest, and filled with the dust of the very plains he had fled. At the same time, a writer named John Steinbeck immortalized the journey of these Dust Bowl refugees in his epic novel, The Grapes of Wrath. He told the story of the Joad family, their heartbreaking loss of their farm, and their desperate trek to California, giving a human face to a national tragedy. Through these powerful works of art, the plight of the Okkies was seared into the American consciousness. The disaster did more than just destroy farmland. It reshaped the nation's identity, forging a new understanding of resilience, social justice, and the enduring human spirit in the face of almost unimaginable hardship. The Dust Bowl taught America that the land was not an enemy to be conquered, but a partner to be cared for, a lesson echoed in the soil conservation programs that followed. It was a catastrophe that changed not only the landscape but the very soul of a nation. But the ground itself holds deeper, more ancient fears. Decades before the Dust Bowl, a different kind of rumble shook the continent, originating from a place few would have ever suspected. The most powerful earthquakes to ever strike the United States did not happen in California. They began in the winter of 1811, deep in the interior, along the Mississippi River near the tiny settlement of New Madrid. This was a seismic zone no one even knew existed. The first quake struck in the dead of night, so violent it was felt over more than 1 million square miles. It was not a single event, but a terrifying series of massive tremors that continued for months, with the three largest each dwarfing the famous San Francisco quake of 1906. The sheer force of these earthquakes did something that seems impossible. It made the mighty Mississippi River run backward. For a few terrifying hours, the river's current was overcome, its waters forced upstream as the land itself convulsed. The quakes lifted entire sections of riverbank, creating temporary waterfalls and permanently altering the river's course. In Tennessee, the land sank so dramatically that the river rushed in to fill the void, creating the vast, cypress-filled Reelfoot Lake in a single, violent instant. Across the shaken landscape, the earth cracked open, unleashing bizarre and frightening phenomena. The ground liquefied, turning solid soil into a churning, unstable soup. From these fissures, geysers of sand and water shot high into the air, a process known as sand blows. Witnesses described the land vomiting its contents, leaving the countryside littered with craters and dunes of pure sand where fertile soil had once been. The sound of the quakes was a deep, continuous roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The shaking was so intense it rang church bells in Boston, over 1,000 miles away. For the settlers living through it, this was more than a natural disaster. It felt like the end of the world. The event sparked a wave of apocalyptic fervor, with many believing they were witnessing divine punishment. The New Madrid earthquakes remain a profound mystery and a sobering warning, a reminder that the Earth's greatest power can sleep in the most unassuming places, waiting to awaken. That sleeping giant beneath the Mississippi has not gone away. The New Madrid seismic zone remains one of the most dangerous and enigmatic geological features in North America. Scientists are still trying to solve the puzzle of why such immense power exists so far from the tectonic plate boundaries where earthquakes are expected. The concern today is not just about history repeating itself, but about a modern catastrophe that could dwarf the damage of a West Coast quake. The geology of the central United States acts like a giant loudspeaker. The ancient, cold, and dense rock beneath the region transmits seismic energy with incredible efficiency over hundreds of miles. A major earthquake in California is often localized, its power absorbed by the fractured landscape. But a quake of the same magnitude in New Madrid would be felt across nearly half the country, shaking cities from Chicago to Atlanta on ground that is far less prepared. The devastation would be compounded by the soft, waterlogged soil along river valleys, which can liquefy, amplifying the shaking and causing buildings to sink. The strange phenomena reported in 1811 add another layer of mystery. Settlers wrote of bizarre animal behavior in the days and hours before the main shocks. They described rabbits and deer acting strangely agitated and birds falling silent. Even more fantastical were the accounts of unexplained lights dancing in the sky, a phenomenon we now call earthquake lights. While the cause is still debated, some scientists theorize that immense pressure on the rocks can generate electrical charges that ionize the air, creating a glow. These precursory signs are a haunting reminder of how much we still have to learn. Today, millions of people live in areas that were mere wilderness during the last great quakes. A major event now would impact the nation's transportation and energy arteries, disrupting the flow of goods and power for the entire country. The New Madrid Fault is a silent, inland threat, a reminder that the ground we build our lives upon can hold secrets and power beyond our comprehension. Just 3 years after the New Madrid quakes subsided, a different kind of fury descended from the sky. In March of 1888, a perfect storm of atmospheric forces unleashed a blizzard of almost mythical proportions on the East Coast. This was not a gentle snowfall. It was a monstrous 2-day assault of hurricane-force winds and relentless snow that paralyzed the region from the Chesapeake Bay all the way to Maine. The wind was the true engine of the disaster, howling at speeds that whipped the snow into a blinding, suffocating white void. It sculpted the landscape into a treacherous new world, piling snow into drifts that towered over 50 feet high, high enough to bury entire 2-story houses and swallow city streets whole. The human stories from within this white chaos were as bizarre as the storm itself. In New York City, hundreds of people were trapped for days in elevated train carriages that had been stopped in their tracks by mountainous snowdrifts. They became frozen prisons suspended above the streets, with passengers huddling together for warmth, sharing whatever food they had, and waiting for a rescue that seemed like it might never come. On the ground, the city was thrown back into a primitive state. The storm's immense weight and the ferocious winds snapped telegraph and telephone poles like twigs, dragging down thousands of miles of wire. This single event severed all communication between major cities, isolating Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. from each other and from the world. The electrical grid, a new and fragile wonder, was utterly destroyed, plunging the bustling metropolises into a cold and silent darkness. This catastrophic failure of above-ground systems sparked a revolutionary change in urban planning. The Great Blizzard of 1888 was the final, undeniable proof that the vital nerves of a modern city could not be left exposed to the elements. In the years that followed, cities launched massive public works projects to move their essential infrastructure underground. Telegraph, telephone, and electrical lines were buried in subterranean conduits, safe from future storms. This disaster, which had so thoroughly demonstrated nature's power to halt human progress, directly inspired the creation of the resilient, hidden networks that power our cities today. A storm of ice and wind ultimately forced us to build deeper and smarter, forever changing the anatomy of the American city. Mount St. Helens had been sleeping for over a century, a beautiful, snow-capped peak in the Cascade Range. But in the spring of 1980, it woke up. The first signs were subtle, a series of small earthquakes that began rumbling deep beneath the mountain in March. Then, on March 27th, a massive steam explosion blasted a crater through the summit ice, sending a plume of ash miles into the sky. It was a clear warning, but the strangest and most terrifying development was yet to come. Geologists monitoring the mountain soon noticed something unprecedented. The entire north flank of Mount St. Helens was beginning to swell. It was a gigantic, growing bulge, pushing outward at a rate of 5 to 6 feet per day. This was not just a hill, it was a 2-mile wide, 1-mile long bubble of rock and ice, pressurized by the magma rising inside the volcano. The mountain was quite literally tearing itself apart, a visible, pulsating proof of the immense forces building within. For weeks, scientists watched this grotesque deformation with a sense of dread, knowing that such an unstable slope could not hold. The inevitable finally happened on the morning of May 18th. A magnitude 5.1 earthquake directly under the bulge acted like a trigger. The entire north face of the mountain simply collapsed in the largest landslide in recorded history. This landslide uncorked the volcano. The sudden release of pressure allowed superheated groundwater to flash into steam, and the result was not a traditional upward eruption. Instead, the volcano unleashed a lateral blast, a sideways directed hurricane of incandescent gas, ash, and pulverized rock. This blast moved at supersonic speeds over 300 miles per hour, and it fanned out across the landscape with unimaginable force. The devastation was instantaneous and absolute. 230 square miles of lush, old-growth forest were flattened in mere minutes. The trees were not just knocked over. They were blown down in neat, radial rows like toothpicks scattered by a giant's hand. This was followed by the stone wind, a bizarre and deadly ground-hugging flow of superheated material that scoured the earth bare. Temperatures inside this flow reached 600 degrees Fahrenheit, vaporizing everything in its path and leaving behind a gray, lifeless landscape that resembled the surface of the moon. The eruption column then shot 15 miles into the atmosphere, turning day into night and spreading ash across the entire United States. The event was a brutal lesson in the raw, directional power of a volcano, a force that could reshape a world in minutes and leave behind a silence more deafening than any roar. Amidst the grey desolation, small miracles of survival began to emerge. The most astonishing were the lodgepole pines. While the mighty, rigid firs around them were snapped and obliterated, these unassuming trees possessed a secret weapon: flexible wood. Their trunks, crafted by evolution to withstand heavy mountain snows, bent like straws before the supersonic blast instead of breaking. When the force passed, many of them simply sprang back, scarred but alive, their green needles a defiant splash of color in a world of ash. Life also endured beneath the surface. Gophers, safely tucked away in their deep burrows, slept through the entire cataclysm. When they emerged, their tunneling activity began to mix the nutrient-poor ash with the fertile soil below, accidentally becoming the first farmers of this new world. In low areas buried by the landslide, entire ponds were smothered, yet incredibly, amphibian life persisted. Frogs and salamanders survived, trapped in waterlogged pockets under countless tons of mud and rock, waiting for their chance to return. The rebirth that followed was as rapid as it was strange. Within weeks, tiny insects like fungus gnats and predatory wolf spiders, blown in on the wind, were already colonizing the barren landscape. The spiders did not need to build webs. Instead, they became hunters racing across the vast, open ash fields. Scientists arriving to study the blast zone found themselves witnessing a natural laboratory being built from scratch. Lupine flowers were among the first plants to return, their roots working in symbiosis with bacteria to pull nitrogen from the air and fertilize the sterile ground, creating pockets of soil where other seeds could take hold. The eruption did not just destroy an old ecosystem, it created the conditions for entirely new ones to form. Where glaciers had once carved valleys, new lakes appeared, soon filled with entirely unique communities of microorganisms. The story of Mount St. Helens is not solely one of destruction, but a profound lesson in resilience. It revealed that life is not merely fragile, but also stubborn, tenacious, and incredibly creative, always finding a way to reclaim even the most devastated ground. That same stubborn resilience would be tested just decades later in the heartland, but this time the onslaught arrived with no warning at all. On March 18, 1925, a single monstrous tornado was born from a seemingly ordinary spring sky. It began its life in the Missouri Ozarks and, defying all known behavior, refused to die. For 3.5 unbelievable hours, this single funnel of destruction carved a continuous path of ruin for 219 miles across 3 states. This was the Tri-State Tornado, an F5 event that remains the deadliest single tornado in American history. Its longevity was its most terrifying and bizarre feature. Most tornadoes are fleeting, touching down for mere minutes before dissipating. This one raged on with a relentless, mechanical consistency, its forward speed of over 60 miles per hour giving victims almost no time to react. Entire towns were simply erased from the landscape in a matter of minutes. In Murfreesboro, Illinois, the storm demolished entire city blocks, trapping hundreds in collapsed factories and homes, and creating a firestorm from broken gas lines that compounded the devastation. The town of Gorham was half obliterated, and in Parrish, the tornado scoured the community so thoroughly that only a handful of structures were left standing. The surreal scenes in its wake were apocalyptic. A schoolhouse in DeSoto, Illinois, was flattened with the students still inside, leading to a frantic, desperate rescue effort by survivors. The force was so immense that it stripped chickens of their feathers and drove splinters of wood deep into metal machinery. The meteorological conditions that allowed this to happen were a freakish anomaly. The tornado formed within a rare, low-precipitation supercell thunderstorm. Its funnel was not a classic twisting rope, but a wide, boiling mass of black smoke, so low and indistinct that many witnesses did not even recognize it as a tornado until it was too late. It rode along a perfectly stable temperature boundary, a river of warm, moist air that acted like a fuel line, feeding the storm's engine for its entire horrific journey without interruption. This was not a storm that danced across the land. It was a grinding, unstoppable force of nature that followed a ruler's straight path, a stark reminder that the sky itself could hold a focused, enduring rage capable of wiping communities off the map in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. The sky over Galveston that September morning held a deceptive calm. Residents of the thriving island city, known as the New York of the South, went about their business, unaware that the most lethal natural disaster in American history was bearing down on them. The tragedy was not just a matter of bad weather, but a cascade of human error and misplaced confidence. For days, Cuban meteorologists, with their superior knowledge of Caribbean storms, had tracked the massive hurricane and issued urgent warnings. Yet the United States Weather Bureau in Washington dismissed their forecasts. Convinced that the storm would curve harmlessly northeast into the Atlantic, the Bureau's chief issued assurances that Galveston was in no real danger. This fatal miscalculation meant no widespread evacuation was ordered. People remained in their homes, trusting the experts. Then the water began to rise. The storm surge was the city's true executioner. It was not a wave, but a slow, relentless drowning. A wall of water 15 feet high swept in from the Gulf of Mexico, completely submerging the island, which at its highest point was only about 9 feet above sea level. The surge picked up houses, shattered them into kindling, and used the splintered debris as a battering ram against everything left standing. The howling winds, estimated at over 140 miles per hour, finished the job. By the time the storm passed, Galveston was a naked, scoured landscape of rubble and corpses. The death toll was staggering, an estimated 8,000 souls lost. The city itself had been virtually erased, its grandeur and prosperity washed away in a few horrific hours. In the aftermath, the survivors faced an unimaginable task, disposing of thousands of bodies to prevent disease. With no time for proper burials, they resorted to a grim and surreal solution, loading the dead onto barges, weighting them down and burying them at sea. But the Gulf, in a final act of cruelty, washed most of them back onto the shore. The grisly work had to be repeated, this time with a massive funeral pyre that burned for weeks, its smoke a haunting shroud over the broken city. The Galveston hurricane stands as a permanent lesson in the danger of arrogance in the face of nature. It was a catastrophe forged not just by wind and water, but by a refusal to listen. Defeated but not broken, the survivors of Galveston refused to abandon their island. Their response to the catastrophe was as monumental as the storm itself, a bizarre and seemingly impossible feat of civil engineering. They decided to physically lift the entire city out of the floodplain. Imagine the audacity of that plan, to raise the very ground beneath your feet. The project began with the construction of a massive granite seawall, a curved barrier 3 miles long and 17 feet thick at its base, designed to blunt the force of any future storm surge. But the wall was only half the solution. The city itself had to be elevated. Using dredges, workers pumped millions of cubic yards of sand from the ship channel, effectively creating a new, higher ground. They did not just pour this sand onto empty lots. They raised the grade of the entire city by up to 17 feet, a staggering amount. This meant that every single structure, from the smallest house to the grandest public building, had to be physically lifted. Over 2,000 buildings were carefully jacked up on screws, their foundations secured while a new landscape was built underneath them. The most spectacular lift was the 3,000-seat Grand Opera House, a massive brick and stone edifice. Engineers raised it an incredible 5 feet, a painstaking process that took hundreds of jacks and an immeasurable amount of nerve. For years, Galveston was a city on stilts, a surreal forest of elevated buildings with new ground slowly filling in the spaces below. Citizens navigated a labyrinth of wooden sidewalks and temporary bridges, living and working above a construction site that was reshaping their world. This was not a temporary fix, it was a permanent physical transformation, a testament to a sheer, stubborn refusal to be conquered by the sea. The project was a triumph of collective will, proving that human ingenuity could quite literally rise to meet any challenge. Where else has such a profound act of rebuilding reshaped an American city? While Galveston fought the sea, a different kind of inferno was brewing in the heart of the continent. On the very same night that the Great Chicago Fire captured the nation's headlines, a far more terrifying and deadly catastrophe was unfolding in the logging towns of Wisconsin and Michigan. This was the Peshtigo Fire, a blaze so immense and violent it defies comprehension. It began as many forest fires do, fueled by a summer of extreme drought and the dry, wasted timber left behind by loggers. But what happened next was something entirely unnatural. The fire did not just spread, it transformed. The superheated air rising from the colossal blaze began to spin, creating towering, hellish vortices known as fire whirls. These were not mere sparks carried on the wind. They were genuine tornadoes made of pure flame, hundreds of feet high, whirling across the landscape at tremendous speeds. A fire whirl could leap across rivers and fire breaks in a single bound, hurling entire barns through the air like torches and stripping the very oxygen from the atmosphere. Witnesses described the sound as a continuous freight train roar, punctuated by the screams of animals and the explosions of buildings. The town of Peshtigo was at the epicenter of this hellscape. As the fire approached, the wind grew so fierce it ripped roofs from houses. Then the temperature skyrocketed. Survivors huddled in the Peshtigo River, the only refuge, described a wall of flame that swept over them, so hot it boiled the water around them and set the very surface of the river on fire as the burning pine resin and sawdust floating on top ignited. Those who stayed on land were incinerated almost instantly. By morning, the town of Peshtigo was gone, reduced to ash and charred foundations. The fire had consumed over 1.2 million acres and killed at least 1,200 people, though the true number is likely far higher, making it the deadliest wildfire in American history by a staggering margin. The cause of such an apocalyptic event remains shrouded in a strange and compelling theory. Some scientists and historians point to the accounts of survivors who reported strange, spontaneous ignitions and a rain of fire from the sky that night. This has led to a fascinating hypothesis that the Peshtigo Fire and other simultaneous blazes across the Midwest were ignited by fragments of Comet Biela, a celestial body that passed close to Earth at that very time. The theory suggests that pieces of the burning comet, rich in flammable gases, entered the atmosphere and rained down upon the tinder-dry forest, sparking countless fires at once and creating the perfect conditions for a firestorm of biblical proportions. Whether the true culprit was a careless lumberman's spark or a piece of a dying star, the Peshtigo Fire stands as a terrifying monument to the raw, unpredictable power of fire, a force that can not only consume the land but twist the very air into instruments of its own destruction. That fire from the heavens was followed just decades later by a watery assault from the sea, one that proved the Northeast was not immune to such tropical fury. In September of 1938, a hurricane of unprecedented power was racing northward, but the United States Weather Bureau issued no warnings for New England. The forecasters believed, as was the conventional wisdom of the time, that such storms always curved harmlessly out to sea. They were catastrophically wrong. This storm, which would become known as the Long Island Express, did not curve. It moved north at an astonishing forward speed of over 60 miles per hour, slamming into Long Island and Connecticut with virtually no warning. The first sign of trouble for many people was a bizarre and unsettling physical sensation. The barometric pressure dropped so far, so fast that it was physically felt in people's ears. Eardrums popped painfully, creating a sudden, muffled silence just moments before the full roar of the wind arrived. This rapid pressure drop was a symptom of the storm's incredible intensity, and it contributed to its most destructive weapon, the storm surge. As the hurricane made landfall, it pushed a wall of water in front of it, but because the storm was moving so quickly, this surge was not a slow, rising tide. It was a single, devastating wave, a bulldozer of ocean water that was thrust inland with terrifying force. On Long Island, the surge arrived as a 50-foot-high wave that obliterated entire communities. In Providence, Rhode Island, the surge funneled up Narragansett Bay, submerging the downtown area under over 13 feet of water. Then came one of the strangest moments of the entire disaster. The eye of the hurricane passed directly over parts of Long Island and Connecticut. The ferocious winds that had been tearing roofs apart suddenly ceased. An eerie, unnatural calm descended. The sun briefly appeared in a sky of washed-out blue, and people emerged from their shelters believing the worst was over. But the calm was a trap. The backside of the hurricane's eye wall was approaching, and because the storm was moving so fast, the winds returned with renewed vengeance, this time from the exact opposite direction. This shift battered structures that had already been weakened, causing complete collapse. The Great New England hurricane killed over 600 people and reshaped the physical coastline, carving new inlets and sweeping away old beaches. It was a brutal lesson in the dangers of meteorological complacency, a storm that moved with the speed of a freight train and left a permanent scar on the landscape. The storm of the century arrived not from the tropics, but from a collision of air masses over the Gulf of Mexico. In March of 1993, a bizarre meteorological recipe came together, creating a superstorm so vast it stretched from Canada to Central America. This was not a simple blizzard or a hurricane. It was a hybrid monster, a bomb cyclone that intensified at a rate rarely seen, sucking in moisture from the Gulf and cold air from the Arctic to blanket the entire eastern seaboard in chaos. Its scale was simply unprecedented. The storm system was so immense that at one point, it simultaneously produced blizzard conditions, tornado outbreaks, and coastal storm surges. It rewrote the rulebook for what a single weather event could do. The most surreal scenes played out in the deep south, where the concept of a snow day was almost mythical. In Birmingham, Alabama, children who had never seen more than a fleeting flurry awoke to over a foot of heavy, wet snow. The weight of this unexpected snowfall collapsed roofs, snapped countless tree limbs, and left millions without power, a deep freeze in a region utterly unprepared for it. The storm's impact on modern life was absolute. For the first time in history, every single major airport on the eastern seaboard was forced to close completely. The skies fell silent. From Atlanta to Boston, not a single commercial flight took off or landed for 2 days, stranding travelers in terminals that became makeshift camps. Interstates were shut down by state troopers, creating a ghost network of empty highways. The storm's hurricane force winds, recorded at over 100 miles per hour along the coast, pushed a destructive storm surge into Florida, all while the northern side of the same system was dumping several feet of snow. This single event was a stark demonstration of nature's power to halt the machinery of our modern world, proving that even with advanced warning, some forces are simply too vast to overcome. How could one storm bring a superpower to such a complete standstill? The sky over the English village of Lynmouth had been weeping for days, a relentless downpour that saturated the surrounding moors. But on the night of August 15, 1952, the weather took a truly sinister turn. The rain became a torrential, almost vertical waterfall, turning the two small rivers that met in the village into raging brown monsters. By morning, 34 people were dead, and the picturesque town was a wasteland of boulders, uprooted trees, and pulverized buildings. The official explanation was a freak weather event, an unfortunate convergence of heavy rain and geography. But a strange and persistent rumor began to circulate, one that pointed an accusing finger across the Atlantic. Just days before the flood, the British public had read newspaper articles detailing a secret military exercise, a joint American and British project with a codename Operation Cumulus. The goal of this operation was cloud seeding, a then experimental technique where particles of silver iodide were dispersed into clouds from aircraft. The theory was simple. These particles would provide a nucleus for moisture to cling to, artificially wringing rain from the sky. The military hoped to master this power, to bog down enemy supply lines or to fill reservoirs for their own troops. But what if their experiment had worked too well? Witnesses near Lynmouth reported seeing strange, chalky skies and unusually colored rain in the days leading up to the flood. Pilots involved in the operation were later quoted saying they were ordered to seed clouds over specific target areas, and that the resulting downpours had frankly terrified them. One radio operator even claimed that after a successful seeding run, his team was told they had caused a terrible disaster and to never speak of it again. The British government swiftly closed the investigation, classified all documents related to Operation Cumulus for 50 years, and dismissed the cloud seeding theory as pure fantasy. But the questions never fully went away. Could a military experiment, a test of humanity's desire to control the weather, have inadvertently unleashed a flood that washed a village away? The Lynmouth flood stands as a haunting, unresolved mystery, a tragedy caught between an act of God and the terrifying possibility of a man-made deluge. The ground began to roll at 5:04 in the afternoon, a violent, shuddering lurch that felt different from anything Californians had known. It was October 17, 1989, and at that precise moment, an entire nation was watching. The third game of the World Series was about to begin in San Francisco's Candlestick Park, a contest between the city's own giants and their Cross Bay rivals, the Oakland Athletics. 62 million Americans were glued to their televisions, waiting for the first pitch. Instead, they saw the screen flicker and turn to static. The Loma Prieta earthquake had just severed the broadcast in the most dramatic signal loss in television history. For those watching at home, the sudden silence was more terrifying than any special effect. They were witnessing in real time the moment a major American city went offline. This bizarre coincidence of timing had an even more profound effect. Because the World Series was starting, the evening commute had essentially been cancelled. Thousands of people who would normally have been stuck in traffic were already home, gathered around their televisions. This simple twist of fate saved an untold number of lives. The Cypress Street Viaduct, a double-decker freeway in Oakland, suffered a catastrophic failure. Its upper deck pancaked onto the lower deck, crushing the cars trapped between them. But the structure was eerily empty compared to a normal weekday rush hour. The same was true on the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, where a section of the upper deck collapsed onto the lower level. The timing of the quake, a confluence of sports and seismology, had inadvertently created a mass evacuation before the ground ever shook. In the aftermath, the nation watched a new kind of disaster unfold on live television. News crews already in place for the baseball game switched instantly to coverage of the unfolding catastrophe. The world saw the first images of the burning Marina district and the collapsed freeway, all framed by the surreal backdrop of a deserted, darkened Candlestick Park. The Loma Prieta quake became a shared, visceral experience for millions, a disaster that played out not as a distant news report, but as a sudden, intimate interruption to an expected spectacle. It was a stark lesson in how fragile our interconnected world truly is, and a haunting reminder that sometimes the very things that distract us can become our unexpected salvation. The fury that descended upon Joplin, Missouri, was a monster of a new kind, a tornado that redefined modern disaster. On May 22, 2011, a single supercell thunderstorm birthed an EF5 tornado that would become the deadliest in the United States in over 6 decades. It was not just a funnel, but a complex, horrifying engine of destruction nearly a mile wide. Its most terrifying feature was a bizarre, multi-vortex structure, a phenomenon caught on video that revealed the storm's true nature. The main funnel was not a solid column, but apparent circulation containing several smaller, intense subvortices. These smaller funnels orbited violently within the larger tornado, like planets spinning around a dark sun. This explained the storm's erratic and brutal damage path, a signature of chaos that left residents and scientists alike stunned. One house would be completely scoured from its foundation, reduced to a bare concrete slab, while the house next door remained standing, its roof damaged but its walls mostly intact. It was as if a giant, malevolent finger had selectively pressed down on certain structures with absolute force, leaving others strangely untouched. These subvortices acted like the concentrated tips of a whip, their localized winds likely exceeding 200 miles per hour, far higher than the main funnel's already catastrophic speeds. They were the reason cars were wrapped around trees and why some victims were carried almost a mile from their homes. This was not a single storm, but a family of tornadoes working in concert, a lesson in atmospheric violence that was both scientifically fascinating and humanly devastating. The event forced a complete rethinking of tornado warnings and community preparedness, proving that even with advanced radar and sirens, nature can still unleash a form of chaos we are only beginning to understand. Just a few years after the storm of the century, another weather event proved that freak conditions could strike with pinpoint accuracy. The Halloween blizzard of 2004 began with an innocent forecast for a chilly, late October evening across Minnesota. Children were pulling on their costumes, anticipating a night of trick-or-treating, while a powerful low-pressure system was gathering strength far to the north. The key ingredient was the unusually warm water of Lake Superior, which had stored summer's heat like a vast thermal battery. As a blast of frigid Arctic air swept down over that warm lake, it created a perfect engine for snow. The warm lake water evaporated furiously into the cold air above it, fueling immense stationary bands of clouds that began dumping snow with relentless intensity. This was not a widespread winter storm. It was a hyper-localized lake effect event, a whiteout machine focused with laser precision on a narrow stretch of Minnesota's North Shore. The result was a surreal and disorienting scene. One moment, children were walking down sidewalks as ghosts and superheroes. The next, they were wading through deepening drifts as the snow fell at rates of 2 to 3 inches per hour. The world transformed into a bizarre collage of orange pumpkins and black cats half buried under a thick, white blanket. Parents had to lead their costumed children home through near whiteout conditions, their plastic pumpkin buckets filling with snow instead of candy. Some families were forced to abandon their plans entirely, trapped in their neighborhoods by snowdrifts that piled up to an astonishing 37 inches in just a few days. The images were jarring: snowmen built next to skeletons hanging from trees, and frozen gravestones in front yards adorned with fake cobwebs. The storm's timing made it feel like a practical joke played by nature, a winter wonderland dropped mercilessly onto the doorstep of autumn. How could a holiday known for its spooky charm become a genuine fight for warmth and safety? The answer lay in that volatile mix of Arctic air and a warm, waiting lake, a combination that can rewrite the calendar and turn a festive night into an unforgettable lesson in the power of place. That sense of community resilience would face one of its most dramatic tests just a few years later, far to the north. The winter of 1997 was one for the record books in the Red River Valley. Snowfall was relentless, piling into drifts that seemed like permanent features of the landscape. When spring finally arrived, it did not bring a gentle thaw, but a rapid, alarming melt. All that snow had to go somewhere, and the Red River of the North, which flows lazily along the border of North Dakota and Minnesota, was its only path. But this river has a bizarre geographical quirk. It flows north towards the colder climate of Canada. This meant that while the southern parts of the river were thawing, the northern stretches were often still locked in ice. The result was a catastrophic traffic jam on a massive scale. Giant slabs of ice, some as large as cars, broke free downstream and were carried north by the swelling current, only to slam into the still frozen sections of the river. These collisions created immense, chaotic dams of ice that blocked the water's flow entirely. These are ice jams, and they acted like a giant plug in a bathtub. With the river's escape route blocked, the water had nowhere to go but up and out, spilling over the banks and inundating the incredibly flat valley. The floodwater did not rush, it seeped and spread, a silent, creeping invasion that turned the entire basin into a shallow, inland sea. The cities of Grand Forks, North Dakota, and East Grand Forks, Minnesota, were directly in its path. The response was nothing short of a human miracle. For weeks, an army of volunteers, students, and National Guard troops worked around the clock, filling and placing millions of sandbags. They constructed a massive, temporary dike system that snaked for miles, a fragile, earth-toned wall holding back a brown ocean. It was a desperate race against the rising water, a battle fought with blistered hands and sheer determination. But as the river crested to a record 54 feet, it became clear that the sandbags alone might not be enough. In a moment of desperate ingenuity, the city turned to the one resource they had in absurd abundance, the snow they had just spent months shoveling. Using heavy machinery, they gathered the colossal, filthy snowbanks that still lined the streets and piled them into a massive, frozen levee. This was not a symbolic gesture, it was a functional, last-ditch barrier. The compacted snow and ice, reinforced with plastic sheeting, acted as a surprisingly effective dam, absorbing water and buying precious time for the most vulnerable neighborhoods. For a while, the city was defended by the very substance that had caused the disaster in the first place. In the end, the water overtopped the main dikes, devastating downtown Grand Forks and forcing the evacuation of the entire city. But in those neighborhoods where the snow dike stood, it made a tangible difference, proving that even in the face of overwhelming force, human creativity and a refusal to surrender can carve out small, miraculous victories. Summer itself seemed to turn against the nation in 1980. While the previous winter had been harsh, it was the arrival of a persistent, invisible dome that would prove far more deadly. A colossal ridge of high pressure, known as a heat dome, parked itself over the central United States and simply refused to move. For weeks on end, it acted like a giant lid on a simmering pot, trapping hot, stagnant air and blocking any cooling weather fronts from breaking through. Temperatures soared past 100 degrees day after day, with the heat index making it feel closer to 120. In Dallas, the temperature reached 100 degrees or higher for a record 42 consecutive days. This was not a typical heat wave, it was a meteorological siege. The most devastating impact was on the human body. The elderly and the poor, many without air conditioning, were trapped in sweltering apartments that became death traps. Hospitals saw a surge in cases of heat stroke and severe dehydration. The death toll climbed silently and relentlessly, eventually claiming an estimated 10,000 lives, a number that made it one of the deadliest natural disasters of the 20th century. Yet its slow, creeping nature meant it never captured the dramatic headlines of a hurricane or tornado. The land suffered just as profoundly. Fields of corn and soybeans, the heart of the nation's breadbasket, withered and died under the unrelenting sun. The soil turned to dust and crop losses soared into the billions of dollars, triggering a national agricultural crisis. But the strangest casualties were the forests. The drought stressed millions of trees, weakening their natural defenses. This created a perfect opportunity for a tiny, opportunistic invader, the bark beetle. With the trees unable to produce enough sap to fight them off, the beetle populations exploded. They burrowed under the bark, laying eggs and cutting off the tree's circulatory systems. Vast stands of pine forests across the West and Midwest turned from green to a rusty, dead brown, killed not by fire but by an insect army empowered by the heat. Even the Great Lakes, those vast inland seas, could not escape the dome's influence. Their water levels plummeted to some of the lowest recorded in history. Shorelines expanded, leaving docks high and dry and forcing ships to lighten their cargo to navigate the newly shallow channels. The 1980 heat wave was a disaster of absence, a catastrophe defined not by what arrived, but by what failed to appear: a cool breeze, a passing cloud, a drop of rain. It was a stark lesson in how a silent, stationary weather pattern could unravel the environment and exact a human cost as severe as any violent storm. The land itself was permanently rewritten on Good Friday, 1964. At 5:36 in the evening, the earth beneath the Gulf of Alaska ruptured along a fault line 600 miles long. This was not a mere tremor. It was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in North America, a magnitude 9.2 event that released more energy than 10,000 of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The shaking was so violent it lasted for 4.5 agonizing minutes, a terrifying eternity for those caught within it. But the quake's power did not stop at the epicenter. Its energy pulsed through the entire planet, traveling through the solid rock of the Earth's crust in what are known as seismic waves. These waves radiated outward for thousands of miles, and their effects were utterly bizarre. In Texas and Louisiana, people watched in disbelief as the water in their swimming pools, canals, and even bayous began to rhythmically slosh back and forth. This strange phenomenon is called a cyc. It is the aquatic equivalent of a wine glass vibrating when a certain note is sung across the room. The earthquake had sung its deep, powerful note, and the bodies of water across America, no matter how small, had resonated in response. The most dramatic and permanent changes, however, were reserved for the Alaskan coastline itself. The force of the quake was so immense that it physically warped the landscape, pushing and pulling the crust like putty. In some places, the land was thrust upward by over 30 feet, an almost unbelievable vertical shift. Overnight, shorelines that had been submerged for millennia were suddenly high and dry, left stranded with dying sea creatures and kelp beds clinging to the newly exposed rock. In other areas, the ground sank by as much as 8 feet, allowing the sea to rush in and drown ancient forests, their dead, salt-bleached tree trunks standing for decades as ghostly sentinels in the new salt marshes. Entire islands were born from the upheaval, while others vanished beneath the waves. The coastline was redrawn on a biblical scale, a stark and humbling reminder that the ground we consider so solid is, in geological terms, a fluid and ever-changing canvas. Rain can be a gentle nuisance or a world-ending force. In September of 2013, the Front Range of the Colorado Rockies experienced the latter. The meteorological setup was a bizarre and perfect trap. For days, an unusually persistent monsoon flow had been pumping immense amounts of tropical moisture north from the Gulf of California and the Pacific. This river of wet air, known as an atmospheric river, slammed directly into a stationary cold front draped across the mountains. The mountains themselves acted as a giant ramp, forcing the sodden air to rise, cool, and wring itself out. The result was a rain event of almost biblical proportions. Some areas received over 17 inches of rain in less than a week, which is more than they typically see in an entire year. This was not a passing thunderstorm. It was a continuous, concentrated downpour that fell on the same watersheds for days on end. The dry, rocky soil of the foothills could not absorb it. The water simply ran off, gathering in creeks that became torrents, and then in canyons that became deadly chutes. The most surreal and isolating consequence was the systematic destruction of the state's transportation backbone. Every single major highway canyon that connected the mountain towns to the plains below was catastrophically damaged or completely destroyed. The raging waters did not just flood the roads, they erased them. Gigantic sections of asphalt were peeled away like scabs, revealing the raw earth beneath. Bridges, those symbols of connection, were smashed into driftwood and swept downstream. Towns like Lyons and Estes Park were suddenly and utterly cut off, transformed into islands surrounded by a moat of liquid rock and debris. The familiar geography of canyons, once scenic routes for tourists, became impassable barriers, their walls now scarred by massive landslides. Rescue efforts became a monumental task, relying heavily on helicopters that buzzed through the mist like mechanical dragonflies, plucking stranded residents from rooftops and isolated patches of high ground. It was a disaster that did not just damage the landscape, it severed it, proving that even the sturdiest human infrastructure is no match for a sky that has decided to truly open. That single-mile-wide vortex in Joplin was terrifying enough, but what if an entire sky could give birth to dozens of them at once? The spring of 1974 delivered an answer that still defines our worst nightmares. In just 24 hours from April 3rd to the 4th, the central and eastern United States were besieged by 148 confirmed tornadoes. This was the super outbreak, a relentless onslaught that scarred 13 states and forced meteorologists to completely rethink the upper limits of tornado violence. The outbreak's true terror lay in its concentration of power. 30 of those tornadoes were rated F4 or F5, the most violent categories on the Fujita scale. These were not isolated events, they were a synchronized army of destruction. The most bizarre and destructive phenomenon was the development of tornado families. A single, massive supercell thunderstorm would spawn one tornado. That funnel would rage across the landscape, eventually dissipate, and then, from the very same storm, a new tornado would form just a few miles down its path. This process could repeat multiple times, creating a lineage of destruction, a family of funnels born from the same parent storm. One supercell in Alabama produced a family of 8 separate tornadoes over the course of its 300-mile journey. This meant communities were not just hit once, they lived under a sustained threat, watching the sky for the next member of the family to descend. The town of Xenia, Ohio, was struck by one of the most infamous members of such a family, an F5 tornado that cut the town in half. The destruction was so complete that it left veterans of World War II comparing the scene to the bombed-out cities of Europe. The sheer number of violent tornadoes in such a short time exposed a critical flaw in our understanding. The existing Fujita scale, based on damage, struggled to categorize the immense power on display. The devastation in Xenia and other towns was so absolute that it pushed the scale to its theoretical limit, forcing scientists to acknowledge that tornadoes could be even more powerful than they had previously believed possible. The super outbreak was not just a disaster, it was a brutal lesson in atmospheric fury, a day that proved the sky could organize its chaos on a scale we were utterly unprepared to measure. The ocean did not retreat for days. In March of 1983, a colossal nor'easter, later named the Ash Wednesday storm, parked itself off the eastern seaboard and began a relentless multi-day assault. Its power came not from a single dramatic strike, but from its maddening endurance, hammering the coast through 3 consecutive high tides. Each tide pushed the Atlantic further inland, fueled by hurricane-force winds that refused to relent. The storm's most bizarre and lasting impact was a process known as overwash. This was not a simple flooding of the beach. The sheer volume of water, combined with the storm's incredible duration, allowed the ocean to punch straight through the fragile barrier islands that act as the coast's first line of defense. Imagine the ocean as a patient, powerful fist and the dunes as a sandcastle wall. With each wave, each surge, that fist broke through, not just spilling over the top but carving entirely new channels. On Assateague Island, the national park famous for its wild horses, the geography was rewritten before the eyes of stunned rangers. The storm carved more than a dozen new inlets through the island, places where the ocean now flowed freely between the open sea and the quiet bay behind it. This was not erosion, it was a sudden, violent surgery on the landscape. Entire dunes vanished, their sand swept inland to form vast, new overwash fans, flat plains of salt and sediment that buried roads and parking lots. For the wild ponies, this was a catastrophic reshaping of their world. Their freshwater ponds turned brackish and their familiar grazing lands submerged or transformed. The Ash Wednesday storm was a slow-motion disaster that demonstrated a profound truth. The coastline is not a permanent line on a map. It is a temporary truce between land and sea, a balance that can be utterly overturned when the ocean decides to reclaim its territory. The city of Chicago became a furnace in July of 1995, a week where the air itself felt like a physical weight. The official temperature soared past 100 degrees, but the heat index, measuring the suffocating combination of heat and humidity, made it feel closer to 120. This was not merely a hot spell, it was a public health catastrophe unfolding in slow motion. The most vulnerable were the elderly, the poor, and those living alone, trapped in sweltering, un-air-conditioned apartments. Many, afraid of crime, kept their windows locked tight, sealing themselves inside brick and concrete ovens from which there was no escape. The city's infrastructure groaned under the strain, with power grids flickering and asphalt streets literally buckling and softening in the oppressive sun. The death toll began to climb, not in a dramatic, singular event, but as a quiet, accumulating tragedy. Neighbors would not realize something was wrong for days. The true strangeness of this disaster, however, was not the weather itself, but the city's bizarre and sluggish response. For the first few days, the mayor's office downplayed the crisis, refusing to declare a state of emergency or fully mobilize resources. This failure to act meant that cooling centers remained underpublicized, and check-ins on the isolated did not happen in time. The catastrophe exposed a terrifying urban phenomenon known as the heat island effect. All the concrete, asphalt, and brick in the city had absorbed the sun's energy for days, storing it like a thermal battery. When night fell, these materials slowly radiated the heat back out, preventing the city from cooling down. In some neighborhoods, the nighttime temperature could be 10 degrees warmer than in the leafy, suburban areas just miles away. This man-made microclimate turned the city into a relentless trap where there was no relief day or night. By the week's end, over 700 people had died, their deaths a stark lesson in how a natural event is magnified by social isolation, urban design, and a failure of collective responsibility. How could a modern city be so unprepared for a force as simple as the sun? The answer was written not in the weather maps, but in the forgotten apartments where the most vulnerable were left to face the heat alone. The water that drowned New Orleans did not come from the sky. It came from below, a silent, rising invasion that breached the city's man-made defenses from within. Hurricane Katrina's storm surge was catastrophic, but the true, bizarre tragedy was the catastrophic failure of the levee system, a network of walls and pumps designed to be the city's salvation. These were not ancient, crumbling structures. Many were modern engineering projects built by the Army Corps of Engineers, and they failed in ways that defied their own design specifications. The flood walls did not simply overtop, they collapsed. In the lower Ninth Ward, a massive section of the flood wall on the Industrial Canal gave way explosively, unleashing a tsunami-like wave that scoured entire neighborhoods from their foundations. Investigations later revealed a shocking design flaw. The steel sheet pilings anchoring the walls had been driven too shallowly into the soft, peaty soil. When the water pressure rose, the walls did not hold, they pivoted, like a door being pushed open, and the city's fate was sealed. Soon, 80% of New Orleans was underwater, a slow-motion drowning that transformed a vibrant cultural capital into a ghostly inland sea. The aftermath presented scenes of surreal and haunting strangeness. A massive cargo ship, the MV Brightfield, was lifted from the Mississippi River and thrown ashore like a child's toy, coming to rest improbably against a riverside hotel. In the French Quarter, the gaudy, celebratory decorations for the Southern Decadence Festival, an annual Labor Day weekend bacchanal, still hung from wrought iron balconies. Mardi Gras beads and colorful banners dangled limply over streets now navigated only by rescue boats, a jarring tableau of a party frozen in time, interrupted by a disaster that had stripped the revelry of all its joy and left only a hollow, plastic echo. For weeks, the city was a place outside of time, a submerged monument to a dual catastrophe of natural force and profound human fallibility. How could a modern American city's primary defense system betray it so completely? The answer was written not just in the water, but in the flawed blueprints and the unstable ground beneath, a stark reminder that our greatest vulnerabilities are often the ones we build ourselves. A new kind of hell was born in the dry brush of the Sierra Nevada foothills. The morning of November 8, 2018 began with a broken power line and a spark. Within minutes, that spark had become a firestorm, racing with unprecedented speed toward the mountain town of Paradise, California. The flames moved not like a creeping line, but as a rolling front of embers carried by powerful winds that cast firebrands a mile ahead of the main blaze. Homes ignited from the inside out before the fire ever reached them, trapping residents on gridlocked streets in a desperate, terrifying exodus. The town of Paradise was virtually erased from the map in a matter of hours, becoming the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history. But the fire's most bizarre and terrifying feature was yet to form. The immense heat generated by the burning town, rising into the unstable atmosphere, began to spin. It created a genuine fire tornado, a swirling vortex of flame and superheated gases with winds later estimated to exceed 140 miles per hour. This was not a mere fire whirl. It was a meteorological monster, a thunderstorm generated by the fire's own energy, capable of tearing homes from their foundations and hurling cars like toys. As the colossal fire grew, it created its own weather, and its smoke plume rose to stratospheric heights. The result was an apocalyptic phenomenon known as the dark of day. By midday, the plume had blotted out the sun across much of Northern California, casting cities like San Francisco, over 150 miles away, into an eerie orange-brown twilight. Streetlights flickered on at noon, and the air became thick with a choking, toxic ash. It felt less like a weather event and more like the end of the world, a stark demonstration of how a single wildfire could plunge an entire region into an unnatural night. How could a fire create its own tornado and shroud a state in darkness? The campfire was a terrifying glimpse into a new era of megafires, where the line between a ground fire and a self-sustaining atmospheric event has been permanently blurred. A deep, subterranean groan announced itself at 9:51 on the night of August 31, 1886. For the elegant city of Charleston, South Carolina, it was the beginning of a minute of pure terror. This was the largest earthquake ever to strike the southeastern United States, a violent shudder that damaged or destroyed nearly every building in the city. The convulsions were felt from New York to Florida and as far west as the Mississippi River. But the true strangeness of the disaster was not in the shaking itself, but in how the very earth responded. As the ground rolled in waves, a bizarre and frightening phenomenon occurred: liquefaction. The waterlogged, sandy soil beneath the city lost all its solidity, churning into a temporary, unstable liquid. This turned the ground into a treacherous, shifting soup. From countless fissures that tore open in the streets, the earth began to vomit. Geysers of water and sand shot into the air, a process known as sand blows. These fountains of sediment left the cityscape littered with craters and dunes of pure gray sand, a substance that had no business being on the surface. Imagine the terror of watching the ground beneath your feet turn to quicks, and while your home crumbles around you, the psychological impact of this event was profound and lasting. For a region that had considered itself seismically safe, the Charleston earthquake was a terrifying revelation. It instilled a deep, persistent anxiety, a sense that the very foundation of their world was fundamentally unstable. This single event created a seismic shadow that lingers to this day, with modern building codes in the southeast still shaped by the memory of that night when the solid ground turned to liquid and the earth itself fought back. That record-breaking wind speed was measured inside a beast of a storm on May 3, 1999. As a historic tornado outbreak unfurled across Oklahoma, one supercell thunderstorm produced a funnel that would rewrite the meteorological record books. Near the town of Bridge Creek, a scientific instrument unlike any other was waiting, a radar system mounted on a truck known as Doppler on wheels. This mobile unit did not run from the storm, it drove directly toward the danger, positioning itself in the path of the monstrous tornado. For the first time ever, scientists were able to peer into the very heart of an EF5 tornado as it raged around them. The data it captured was both terrifying and revelatory. The radar revealed that the main funnel was not a single, cohesive column of wind. Instead, it was a complex parent vortex, a massive circulation containing several smaller, intensely violent whirls known as suction vortices. These smaller vortices orbited the center of the main tornado like planets spinning around a malevolent sun. This structure explained the tornado's bizarre and devastating damage path. The wind speed of the parent vortex was already catastrophic, but the suction vortices were where the true, concentrated fury resided. As these smaller whirls spun and danced within the larger funnel, their localized wind speeds were amplified to an almost unimaginable degree. It was inside one of these suction vortices that the radar recorded a wind speed of approximately 302 miles per hour, the highest wind speed ever directly measured on the surface of the Earth. This is why one house would be completely scoured from its foundation, reduced to a bare, polished concrete slab, while the house next door was left with its walls mostly intact, its roof torn away but its structure still standing. The suction vortex was like the concentrated tip of a whip, a finger of focused destruction that selectively erased everything it touched. The Doppler on wheels data transformed our understanding of tornado violence, proving that the most powerful storms are not simple funnels, but intricate, multi-layered engines of chaos. How could a single storm contain such organized, yet utterly random fury? A strange and silent killer emerged from a lake in Cameroon one August night, but its solution would be crafted by American ingenuity. The disaster at Lake Nyos was unlike any other, a limnic eruption. This bizarre phenomenon occurs when a deep lake becomes saturated with carbon dioxide gas, often from volcanic vents at its bottom. The water acts like a giant pressurized soda bottle, holding the gas in solution until a trigger, like a landslide, suddenly releases it. In 1986, Lake Nyos belched a colossal, invisible cloud of carbon dioxide. Heavier than air, the gas flowed down the surrounding valleys, silently suffocating over 1,700 people and countless animals in their sleep, a tragedy that left villages eerily intact but utterly lifeless. The global scientific community was stunned, and American researchers from the United States Geological Survey were among the first to unravel the mystery. They recognized this was not a one-time event. The lake was already recharging with deadly gas, a ticking time bomb. The challenge was unprecedented. How do you defuse a lake? The American-led team devised a brilliantly simple yet nerve-wracking solution, a degassing pipe. Imagine lowering a long straw into a giant pressurized bottle of soda. Scientists installed a pipe that reached deep into the gas-rich water. Once primed, the water would rush up the tube, and as the pressure dropped, the carbon dioxide would fizz out violently, like opening a shaken soda, creating a spectacular geyser that harmlessly vented the gas into the atmosphere. This ongoing effort, installing multiple pipes in Lake Nyos and the similar Lake Manawan, has made them safer, a quiet, continuous project to prevent another silent night of death. It stands as a profound example of international science turning a freakish, almost supernatural disaster into a manageable, if still strange, problem of geological plumbing. The digital age has its own unique vulnerabilities, where a single software bug can plunge an entire region into darkness. On August 14, 2003, a power line in northern Ohio brushed against some overgrown trees. This minor event should have triggered an alarm in a control room, but a software bug in the system kept it silent. Operators, unaware of the growing instability, watched as that first failure cascaded across the grid. Within minutes, a domino effect of shutdowns raced across the northeastern United States and parts of Canada. 55 million people suddenly found themselves without electricity, in a blackout that stretched from New York City to Toronto and Detroit. The modern world simply stopped. Subways froze in dark tunnels, trapping thousands. Water treatment plants ceased operation, and traffic lights went dark, creating gridlock that lasted for hours. The event was a stark demonstration of how deeply interconnected and fragile our energy infrastructure truly is. Yet in the midst of this chaos, something unexpected happened. With a power out, the night sky became visible in a way city dwellers had not seen in decades. The absence of light pollution revealed a breathtaking canopy of stars, a silent, celestial spectacle unfolding above the darkened metropolises. The societal side effects were equally strange. Satellites monitoring the atmosphere recorded a sudden, dramatic drop in air pollution. With factories idle and cars stuck in gridlock, the haze of smog simply vanished, offering an unintended glimpse into what a lower energy future might look like. Even more curiously, hospitals in the affected regions reported a statistically significant spike in birth rates exactly 9 months later. It seems that with the televisions and computers off, people found a different way to pass the time, adding a surprising footnote to one of the largest technological failures in history. This blackout was more than just a power failure. It was a real-world experiment that revealed the hidden rhythms of society when the machines suddenly fall silent. The river had a will of its own that spring, a mindless, relentless intent to overflow its banks. Weeks of epic snowmelt and record rainfall across the Midwest funneled into the Mississippi, creating a surge of water so immense it threatened to rewrite the map from Illinois to the Gulf of Mexico. This was not a flash flood, but a slow-motion crisis of continental scale, a bloated giant testing every levee, every dam, and every ounce of human ingenuity along its 1,200-mile path. The river pushed against the very spine of American commerce, threatening to paralyze barge traffic, submerge power plants, and drown entire cities. But the most dramatic confrontation occurred at a strategic bend in the river, where the states of Missouri, Illinois, and Kentucky meet. Here, the rising water created an impossible choice. The historic town of Cairo, Illinois, built on a low-lying peninsula at the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, was facing a flood of biblical proportions. Water was lapping at the very top of its levees, and a single breach would have sent a wall of water into the town, drowning it under 30 feet of water and likely killing thousands. The only way to save Cairo was to intentionally sacrifice something else. That something was the Bird's Point New Madrid floodway, a vast, sparsely populated agricultural area in Missouri. This was a floodplain designed for exactly this purpose, a pressure valve built into the river system decades earlier, but to use it required a bizarre and destructive act. With the river at a record crest, the United States Army Corps of Engineers made the call. They packed the Bird's Point levee with explosives. On the night of May 2, 2011, they deliberately blew it up. The detonation was not a single blast, but a series of controlled explosions that tore a 2-mile-wide gash in the earthen wall. The Mississippi River roared through the breach, thundering into the floodway with terrifying force. It was a calculated, man-made disaster designed to avert a far greater natural one. 130,000 acres of Missouri farmland were instantly inundated, transforming fertile fields into a raging, temporary sea. Homes were swept away, and the land was scoured and buried under sand and silt. The sacrifice worked. The river level at Cairo dropped by several critical feet, and the town was saved. This desperate act laid bare a brutal truth about managing nature's fury. that sometimes survival is not about stopping the disaster, but about choosing where to let it happen. The ground had barely stopped trembling when a second man-made catastrophe began. In the chaotic hours following the Great San Francisco earthquake, the city's fire chief made a desperate gamble. Facing rampant fires with broken water mains, he authorized the use of dynamite to blow up entire city blocks, hoping to create fire breaks that would starve the advancing flames. This decision unleashed a new kind of chaos. Untrained troops and volunteers, armed with explosives and little expertise, began detonating buildings with reckless abandon. Far from halting the inferno, these unauthorized blasts often scattered burning embers across the city, igniting new fires and spreading the destruction further than the earthquake ever could. The roar of collapsing buildings became a terrifying soundtrack to a city cannibalizing itself in a futile attempt to survive. Amidst the ruins, a fierce political war erupted over who would control the city's future. The powerful mayor, Eugene Schmitz, and his political cronies saw an opportunity to reshape San Francisco to their own advantage, using reconstruction funds and contracts as tools for patronage and profit. They were opposed by the city's business elite, led by the former mayor James Phelan, who feared the old corrupt political machine would be rebuilt along with the city. This struggle was not just about bricks and mortar, it was a battle for the very soul of San Francisco. Phelan and his committee openly accused the mayor's administration of gross incompetence, pointing directly to the disastrous dynamiting policy as evidence of a leadership failure that had compounded a natural disaster into a man-made holocaust. Out of this conflict arose a revolutionary idea, the Burnham Plan. Visionary architect Daniel Burnham presented a breathtaking blueprint for a new San Francisco, with grand boulevards, sweeping parks, and a coherent civic center that would rival the great cities of Europe. It was a chance to build a metropolis not just rebuilt but reborn, a phoenix of stunning beauty and order. But the city's relentless drive for speed and a desire to return to normalcy, whatever the cost, ultimately killed the grand vision. Property owners demanded quick reconstruction on their existing lots, and the political will for a comprehensive overhaul evaporated. The beautiful, orderly city of tomorrow was sacrificed to the urgent, messy demands of today. The legacy of those frantic days is written in the very streets we walk. The controversial dynamiting, intended as a solution, became a case study in how panic and poor planning can exacerbate a crisis. The political battles forged a new, more robust civic consciousness that would eventually break the back of the old political machine. And the ghost of the Burnham Plan lingers in the city's quirky, haphazard layout, a permanent reminder of the majestic, orderly city that could have been. San Francisco was not merely shaken by the earth and scorched by fire, it was fundamentally reshaped by the human conflicts that played out in its ashes. A different kind of fury arrived not as a funnel, but as a 600-mile-long wall of wind. The 2012 derecho began as a cluster of thunderstorms in the Midwest, but it quickly organized into a single, relentless line of destruction that raced eastward at speeds of nearly 60 miles per hour. This was not a hurricane or a tornado, but a land hurricane, a storm of such immense scale and forward momentum that it maintained its hurricane force winds for over 700 miles. The most terrifying sight was the leading edge of the storm, a phenomenon known as a shelf cloud. This was not a fluffy cumulus cloud. It was a menacing, dark wedge that stretched from horizon to horizon, a solid, advancing cliff of boiling gray and black that looked like the end of the world rolling toward you. For those watching its approach, the sight was both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling, a physical wave of atmosphere that seemed to swallow the entire sky. The storm's power was in its speed and its breadth. It did not target a single town, it flattened a corridor of states. Winds exceeding 80 and 90 miles per hour slammed into city after city with the force of a freight train. The damage was not from a twisting motion, but from a straight-line blast that snapped ancient trees like twigs, flipped tractor trailers, and peeled roofs from shopping malls. The aftermath was a bizarre inversion of modern life. The storm left over 4 million people without power during one of the worst heat waves in years, creating a desperate situation where the very air people needed to breathe became a suffocating blanket in homes without air conditioning. What made this disaster so strange was its stealth. It arrived with little of the traditional tornado warning drama, just a darkening sky and a roar that gave people only minutes to find shelter before their world was turned into a landscape of splintered wood and downed power lines. How could a storm without a single, focused eye be so devastatingly powerful across an entire region? The rain fell with a cruelty that seemed personally directed at New England. In August of 1955, two hurricanes, Connie and Diane, slammed into the same stretch of Connecticut in a one-week period. The ground, already saturated by Connie, could absorb no more. When Diane arrived, every drop of rain became instant runoff, turning placid rivers into raging, brown monsters that clawed at their banks. The most surreal story of the disaster unfolded in the town of Winsted. As the Mad River swelled far beyond any known record, it undermined the foundation of a small, white clapboard house. The water did not simply flood the building, it lifted it from its moorings. The house, with the Dufresne family still huddled inside, began to move. It was not a slow drift, but a violent, careening journey down the swollen river, a vessel of wood and terror caught in the current. For a terrifying half-mile, the house rode the flood, spinning and lurching as it collided with bridges and other debris. Inside, the family could only hold on, listening to the roar of the water and the sickening crunch of impacts, believing each moment would be their last. Then, as abruptly as it began, the ride ended. The flying house slammed into a stand of trees and came to a precarious rest, battered but miraculously intact. The Dufresne family crawled out of their front door, shaken and bruised but alive. Their impossible survival became a symbol of hope amidst a catastrophe that killed 90 people and caused damage that would be measured in the billions of dollars today. The disaster exposed the vulnerability of New England's aging industrial towns, many of which had been built directly in the floodplains of the very rivers that now sought to destroy them. It was a brutal lesson in the cumulative power of nature, where one storm alone was manageable, but two in succession became a biblical-scale deluge. Sometimes the most dangerous storms are the ones that have no name. In late October 1991, a bizarre meteorological dance began over the Atlantic Ocean. The dying breath of Hurricane Grace, a tropical system from the south, drifted north and collided with a frigid low-pressure system barreling down from Canada. But this was not a simple merger. The two systems did not cancel each other out. They fed on each other's energy in a violent feedback loop, creating a monster that was neither a pure hurricane nor a classic nor'easter. Forecasters called it the perfect storm, a rare hybrid with the immense size of a winter gale and the ferocious, concentrated winds of a hurricane. It became a self-sustaining weather bomb, parked hundreds of miles off the coast of New England, and it began to churn the ocean into a state of pure chaos. The waves it generated were not like anything seen before in the region. They were not rolling swells, but steep, unstable mountains of water, their crests torn into a blinding spray by winds that screamed at over 70 miles per hour. The National Data Buoy Center recorded a wave height of 100 feet, a measurement so extreme it was initially dismissed as an instrument error. This was a rogue wave factory, a churning arena where the very physics of the sea seemed to break down. Into this maelstrom sailed the Andrea Gale, a 72-foot sword fishing boat out of Gloucester, Massachusetts. The crew of 6 experienced fishermen was racing home, trying to outrun the gathering fury. Their last radio transmission was a broken, static-filled message, telling another vessel they were in heavy seas and riding it out. They were never heard from again. The fate of the Andrea Gale and her crew remains one of the ocean's great tragic mysteries. The storm's sheer power and the boat's presumed fate were immortalized first in a best-selling book and then a major film, searing the event into the public's imagination. But the real legacy of the perfect storm is a meteorological one, a stark reminder that when different weather systems combine in just the wrong way, they can create a new kind of monster, an unnamed fury that exists only to test the limits of the sea and those brave enough to sail upon it. A flock of birds can be a simple, beautiful sight until the moment it becomes a catastrophic force of nature. For U.S. Airways Flight 1549, that moment arrived just 90 seconds after takeoff from New York's LaGuardia Airport. A massive flock of Canada geese flew directly into the path of the ascending Airbus A320. The impact was not a series of small thumps, but a violent, shuddering collision that immediately silenced both of the plane's powerful engines. Inside the cabin, the roaring hum of the jets was replaced by an eerie, deafening quiet, broken only by the rush of wind. Captain Chesley Sullenberger, a calm and experienced pilot, took the microphone and made an announcement that would become legendary: brace for impact. He had assessed the situation in seconds, realizing he could not reach any airport. His only option was the icy, unforgiving expanse of the Hudson River. This was not a controlled descent, it was a desperate, high-stakes glide. Captain Sullenberger and his co-pilot, Jeffrey Skiles, had to perfectly angle the massive airliner, keeping its wings level to prevent it from cartwheeling apart upon hitting the water. They had to manage its speed: too fast and it would shatter, too slow and it would stall and drop from the sky. In a maneuver that seemed to defy physics, Sully set the powerless jet down on the water's surface with the grace of a seabird, a landing so smooth that many passengers initially thought they were on a runway. The plane bobbed in the freezing January water, and an immediate, orderly evacuation began. People moved onto the wings and into inflatable slides that became life rafts, all while frigid water poured into the cabin. The response was as miraculous as the landing itself. Ferries and rescue boats, having witnessed the impossible, converged on the scene within minutes, plucking every single one of the 155 souls from the cold river. The miracle on the Hudson stands apart from every other disaster on this list. It was a potential catastrophe born from a random encounter with the natural world, a flock of birds that turned a machine of modern travel into a silent glider. But it was a disaster averted, not by luck, but by profound human skill, clear-headed courage, and a seamless chain of teamwork. It serves as a breathtaking reminder that sometimes our greatest battles with nature are not fought with force, but with cool competence, a steady hand on the controls in the face of the utterly unexpected. From the bizarre to the terrifying, these 33 events paint a portrait of a nation shaped by forces beyond our control. We have seen cities flooded by syrup, rivers forced to run backward, and storms that generated their own tornadoes of pure flame. Each story is a unique and often unsettling chapter in the American experience, a testament to the raw, unpredictable power of a planet that is never truly tamed. These disasters are more than just historical footnotes. They are profound lessons in human nature. They reveal our incredible resilience, as seen in the survivors of Galveston, who literally raised their city from the floodplain. They showcase our ingenuity, from the scientists who devised a way to defuse a deadly lake to the engineers who rerouted a continent's mightiest river with explosives. And they lay bare our capacity for folly, from the ignored warnings that led to the deadliest hurricane to the flawed levees that failed a modern metropolis. These events remind us that our relationship with the natural world is a constant negotiation, a dance between adaptation and survival. What is the strangest weather event you have ever witnessed? Perhaps you have a family story about a forgotten blizzard or a local legend about a freak flood. Share your own tales of nature's oddities in the comments below, and if you found this journey through history's strangest disasters compelling, Be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the most fascinating corners of our past.